Noah and Kate, Chapter 35. Kate had a busy day ahead of her. An intentionally busy day, the kind of day you pack with errands and tasks and to-do lists and endless I've got to's in the vain hope that running around like decapitated poultry might distract your brain from the really important stuff. For one, she was going to start looking for an apartment today. The cabin was homey and peaceful and had been a refuge for her when fleeing the city. But at the same time, the memories that jumped out at her from every corner were starting to become more bitter than sweet. The reminders of carefree childhood summers were wonderful, of course, and every time she thought of them she couldn't help but smile. But the other memories, equally wonderful, maybe a bit too wonderful, which were decidedly adult and anything but carefree, were starting to paint over the childhood ones. She didn't want that to happen. A new place with no memories, no emotional snags, no conflicted feelings. No Noah. She half laughed, half chided herself as she thought this. For God's sake, the word no was right there in the man's name. Talk about a sign from the universe. Then she was going to help Paige start moving some books into the new space she'd leased next to the bookstore. Lillian's still housed the dusty remnants of the 1950s ladies' wear store, but at least now Paige was entitled to use the empty space to help declutter Lizzie and Fitz. Physical labor would be good for her, Kate decided. Work out some stress, get some endorphins flowing. Jeff wanted to meet for coffee, and Kate had agreed, mentally tacking it on to some errands she had to run for Zuzu's pedals and a trip to see Jade at the post office. Then there was that part-time job posting at Van Sloyman's nursery just west of town. It might be good experience and a chance to learn the ropes about actually growing things, not just selling seeds. Groceries, pharmacy, gassing up her car. Yep, she was a busy, busy lady. Way too busy to think about anything. She had lunch outside on the deck, watching the sun dance on the surface of the lake, and noticed how much lower it was in the sky now. The days were growing a little shorter, the air a little cooler, and all around her the lush, deep green was beginning to rust in places, turning bright yellow here and there, or erupting in one last blaze of brilliant orange amongst the verdant deep. Fall never arrived with a bang, the way summer often arrived with one sweltering day that shocked everyone and made every conversation start with, "Can you believe this weather?" Fall stole over you quietly, gave you hints and glimpses and plenty of warning of the chill that was slowly creeping in. She took her dishes back inside and turned on the tap to rinse them off. An almighty groan of protest grumbled from the old pipes behind the countertop, and even the floorboards beneath her shook. Nothing came out of the faucet for a moment, and then a blast of dirty sludge burst forth, splashing into the sink and spraying directly up onto Kate's face. She reared back with a gasp and closed her eyes against the onslaught, fumbling blindly for the tap to turn off the foul spray. The pipes went quiet, and Kate stood, blinking, half expecting the thing to explode again of its own free will. Great, she thought, grabbing a towel to wipe off her face and neck. She didn't even want to think about where that water might have come from, or why it had a color. The universe was sending her direct, targeted messages at this point. Leave this cabin, get on with your life, or next time I'll cave the roof in. And for some reason, with that ridiculous thought, that childish, magical thinking belief that the cabin was out to get her, her eyes began to well up. Without even feeling it coming on, big, fat tears started rolling down her face. She didn't admonish herself. She didn't tell herself to toughen up, to stop feeling sorry for herself, to forget him. She just continued to towel off her face and neck as she moved towards the bathroom. She stepped out of her sodden sleep shirt, and instead of tossing it into the laundry basket, she balled it up and stuffed it into the little garbage bin by the sink. She'd been meaning to get rid of this stupid cow shirt for a while now, and if the universe was going to make her do it by soaking it in God knows what, then so be it. She cautiously turned on the bathtub tap, standing way back in case of another sludge bomb, and noticed with relief that after a few hesitant sputters and a groan from the pipes, the water began to clear and run smoothly. The shower behaved the same way, offering only a dribble of gunk before clearing completely. With the hot water streaming over her, with the clean scent of soap reviving her, she scrubbed her whole body, even the parts that had been spared the blast. Her hair had escaped the onslaught, too, and so she simply wound it up into a top knot and let the water massage the back of her neck and shoulders, easing the tension that had started to build there. Her skin tingling and feeling thoroughly cleansed of ick, she stepped out of the shower and wrapped herself in a bath towel. She felt better, physically anyway, but as she regarded herself in the mirror and let her hair down to fall loosely around her shoulders, her mind wandered to the one subject she was trying so valiantly not to think about. Why even name it? She tried to push the thoughts out of her mind, but why not just feel this feeling until it fades and hope it eventually goes away entirely? He was leaving. She knew it. She'd always known it. He had never promised her otherwise, had never asked her to come with him, had never asked her to wait. She had fallen in love with someone who didn't want to be in love, and wouldn't even be around to love anyway. She'd let her teenage crush on him lead her down a path no sensible adult would have ever taken, and now she was paying for it. And she was angry, too. Angry over his outburst yesterday, over his embarrassment that she had told Jeff about their relationship. He'd been worried that Jeff would think he was an asshole to her by leaving her. Worried to the point of snapping at her. He wasn't worried about actually being an asshole. He was just bristling at the idea of someone thinking he was. Did she matter at all? If she'd asked herself this question even a few weeks ago, she would have said she absolutely mattered to him. Now, she wasn't so sure. He'd never wanted Paige to know about them. He'd never acted like anything but her friend when other people were around. And instead of being upset at Jeff's interest in her, he was only upset that Jeff might think less of him. The inescapable truth was that it really was all about the sex for him. A summer fling, nothing more. The quieter the better, kept in private, conducted and ended with a minimum of fuss. And fuck it all, she had known that going in. Stupid, stupid woman. I've learned, okay? She said out loud, casting her eyes heavenward, hoping someone or something might hear. You can stop sending me lessons now. Lessons about what? A voice said. She shrieked and jumped, bracing herself against the bathroom door. Noah was standing in the hallway, casually leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, and a ridiculous grin on his face. Jesus, Noah, she panted, clutching at her heart. For fuck's sake, you scared the life out of me. Sorry, he grinned. He was not sorry, not with that expression on his face. Don't you knock any more? She demanded, tightening her towel around herself more securely. I know it's your cabin, but I knocked, he said, several times. I heard the pipes clanking and the water running, and I figured you were having a shower. Figured you must have been baptized. Her brow furrowed. What? The geyser of Gunge. It's a yearly occurrence here. Every Kincaid has been blasted by a buildup of gunk from the well at some point. Congratulations. You're officially part of the family. A bit of warning might have been nice, she grumbled, moving past him towards the stairs up to the loft. She felt more than heard him push off from the wall and start to follow her up. I'm just going to get dressed. You can wait downstairs, she said over her shoulder, in a tone that she hoped implied he really should do just that. I like watching you get dressed, he said, or undressed, or both. She stopped at the top of the stairs and sighed, realizing there was little point in playing shy with him. He'd seen her naked. She'd seen him naked. They'd done things to each other's naked bodies. They were way past modesty at this point, even if she did feel like tightening her towel a bit more. "Whatever," she said, and went towards the old mirrored dresser with the stiff, squeaky drawers. She yanked on the top one a few times to force it open, each yank that little bit harder, that little bit more frustrated. "Hey, come on, Katie, what's wrong?" he asked, coming up behind her and putting his arms around her waist. In the mirror, she saw him rest his head on her shoulder and pull a face, an exaggerated pout that coaxed a rebellious smile out of her. She lowered her eyes and tried not to laugh. "Nothing's wrong," she said. Hell, even she didn't buy that. "Are you mad at me?" he asked, nuzzling her neck. Yes, she thought. I shouldn't be, but I am. "No," she said. "I don't believe you," he said in a gentle sing-song. "I think you're still mad at me for scaring you down there." Of course you'd think that, she thought. Men were so simple, so linear. Or maybe you're just grumpy because of the Gunge Geyser. I should have warned you about that. But I thought for sure you would have been baptized a long time ago, back when we were kids. "I'm not grumpy or mad," she said. "Oh, yeah?" He nibbled on her ear, and a shiver ran through her, so tingly and trembly that she almost shied away from the sensation. "Can I have a kiss, then?" She turned around to face him, making him step back a bit. He kept his arms around her, though, and settled in comfortably for what he probably thought was going to be one of their epic kisses. And when his mouth came down gently on hers, and his breath brushed whisper-soft against her cheek, and his throat hummed with the smallest of barely audible groans, damn it, he was right. He was everything right. From the way he held her, to the way his body seemed to surround her, from the gentle pressure of his arms around her waist, to the lingering sensuality of his lips on hers. She sank into the kiss freely, feeling vaguely like those damsels in old-fashioned movies who strike blows against the villainous hero before flinging their arms around his neck and kissing him with abandon. Noah wasn't the villain, and it wasn't his fault she loved him so much. Just a little longer, she told herself, savoring the warm pleasure of his kiss and the way his shoulders and back felt beneath her hands as she held him. Just a little more of him. Couldn't hurt. She broke the kiss before he was ready, and he almost fell forward as she leaned back. He blinked and found her eyes with a mild look of confusion that somehow seemed more tender, more touching than she'd ever seen before. "I have to get dressed," she said as gently as she could. "I have a lot to do today." Those eyes of his, what was going on behind those beautiful damn eyes? He was looking at her with a different kind of intensity, a pointedness that made her half believe he was going to burst out laughing, or scoop her up and swing her around the room, or tell her he'd just won the lottery. In fact, since the moment she'd caught sight of him, lounging casually outside the bathroom, something about his entire being had seemed strange. Not bad strange, just strange. "I think we can spare a little time, don't you?" he murmured, pulling her close again. Oh, okay, now she got it. He was horny. Hornier than usual. "Noah," she protested, even as a laugh escaped her. He had picked her up and was mock-devouring her neck, complete with caveman growls, and was now walking them both towards the bed. He dropped her unceremoniously and made a show of pulling his t-shirt off, presumably to mesmerize her with the masculine beauty of his bare chest. Which worked, of course. She couldn't look away from all those lines and contours and the warm smoothness of his skin, even as he kicked off his shoes and climbed onto the bed beside her. He waited before kissing her, which surprised her a little. He settled in beside her, gazing down at her, his eyes roaming over her face with that dreamy, I don't know where to start first, haze that she loved. She reached up to sink her hand into his hair, her fingers sliding along his cheek, and he actually closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into it, then turning to kiss the soft skin of her inner wrist. "What is going on with you today?" she whispered, teasing him. "Are you feeling extra caveman today?" "Always," he replied, lowering his head to press his lips to her neck, so lightly that it tickled. She giggled and he lifted his head up, his smile so boyish and goofy she playfully swatted his face away. "You're always horny, is that what you're saying?" she challenged him. "For you, I am." He found her neck again and began the trail of kisses anew, his lips growing firmer with each one. "But you must have some sort of kill switch, right?" she tried. "There must be some way of dialing you down." He paused then and raised his head, looking at her with that penetrating gaze that she found breathtaking and unsettling at the same time. "You mean besides just asking me to stop?" "Oh, I know you'd stop if I asked you to," she said, afraid for a second that he might actually doubt she believed it. "I just know there's got to be something I could say that would make you want to stop." "Nope," he said, his voice muffled by his return to her neck. "Never, never." "Oh, come on," she laughed. "There has to be something." "Forget it, Malone," he said, raising his head again, and this time his hair was mussed like he'd been genuinely rolling in the hay. She laughed at the sight of it, and that same warmth, those same frisky butterflies started doing their thing. "There's nothing you could say to make me not want you." Damn, he was good. Somehow, in the midst of their conversation, he'd managed to unzip himself and wriggle his butt free of the jeans. The feeling of him pressed firmly against her thigh did all sorts of things to the warm place between her thighs and the even warmer place in her chest. She should stop him. As fun as this was, as much as he'd managed to thaw out her bad mood, she really did have to get going and do all those things she'd contrived in order to stop thinking about, well, him. She couldn't let herself enjoy this too much. That was how she'd gotten herself into this situation in the first place. It was fun, though. Maybe keeping it fun was the best way to ease off the gas a little. "I think you're lying," she said. "In fact, I know you are. There's got to be something I could say that would have you bolting out of here like a jackrabbit." He laughed. "You were so wrong. But hey, if you're in a betting mood." He brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "Give it your best shot." "Really?" The slightest of shrugs. A confident shrug, if that was even possible. "But if I win, which I will, then you'll stay. And let me show you just how wrong you are." "Cocky, aren't you?" She arched an eyebrow at him. "Hell yes." He shifted his hips and pressed himself against her more firmly. "Very cocky, right now. The cockiest." She laughed, and he made a happy sound, muffled by her hair once again. "And what if I win?" "You won't." "Humor me." "If you win," he trailed off, and then came up with it, "I'll walk naked down Main Street." She scoffed. "You'd do that anyway. You'd love it. Come on, try harder." "If you win, I'll put on a suit and take you to dinner. A real dinner. No plastic forks or swamp water." "Okay," she agreed. "I could use a nice night out." "Don't get your hopes up. You won't win." "Smug bastard," she grinned. "Okay, how about you're a terrible lover?" He let out a laugh as he nibbled her ear, and she could feel him smiling against her. She wasn't even halfway serious. This statement was so flagrantly false that even she couldn't help but laugh to hear it said out loud. "Well then," he murmured, his voice playful and yet moving into that dangerously seductive zone that she could never resist. "Even more reason to stay. I'll show you how much I've upped my game." His lips moved fluidly down her neck, tickling her with sensuous kisses and gentle nips, teasing and tasting her, moving to her cheek and along her jaw. His hand moved down her side until he was cupping her breast. "Okay, wait," she said, hearing the hitch in her breath. "If you're going to be all serious about this, I get 3 guesses. He chided. "That was guess number 1, he said, his lips finding hers and brushing against them with light, teasing kisses. He kissed around her lips, her chin, always edging closer to her mouth. If he kissed her deeply, she'd be gone, she knew it. So she gently pushed back his shoulders. "That's not fair. You know I was just joking. We both know that couldn't possibly be your kill switch, Kincaid. Come on, play fair." He looked down at her and sighed. But then that irrepressible grin tore at his lips. "Okay, Malone. Take your best shot. 3 guesses. If you guess wrong again, though..." He paused, and then lowered his head to kiss her, a succulent little taste of a kiss. "I'm going to kiss you, deep and long, the way you like." He paused again and moved lower, the gentlest of pressure of his lips near hers. "And if you guess wrong 3 times... "What?" she breathed, feeling the unbearable heat beginning to pool between her legs. "I'm going to slide deep inside you," he murmured through a smile, "and keep you here all day." She almost whimpered. The man had so much power over her, it was insane. She knew she should stop this, but her heart was beating faster and more thunderously than ever before. "Okay," she said, hardly registering that she was agreeing to his terms. "Let me see, then. What could I say that would make you want to stop?" She paused and aimed for levity to ease the unbearable tension building in her womb. "I know. I want to have your baby." The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them, and for a heart-stopping moment she feared she had said the wrong thing. But when he just smiled down at her and lowered his lips to hers, all fear vanished. He kissed her sensuously, teasingly, lifting his lips away before lowering them again to nip at hers with gentle, grazing little bites. "You mean I get to come deep inside you?" he murmured, kissing her between words. "Fill you up, empty myself into you, give you everything I have." Each sentence was tinged with longing and desire, and the images his words put into her brain made her shiver, shudder, and shake as you wring an orgasm from me so intense I might just black out. Sounds good to me. Oh, he was good. She'd give him that. She smiled as he kissed her, her heart fluttering just that little bit more at the pure, sensual, sexual potency of his words. But his reaction to her words proved to her more than ever that this was just a game he was intent on winning. So she decided to make the most of it. He raised his head, his eyes shining down at her with amusement and affection and desire, and she wished she could freeze this moment in time. It was simply too delicious, too delightful to stop. "What else you got, Malone?" He almost mouthed the words. His whisper was so low. His gaze was moving from her eyes to her lips and down to the swell of her breasts, and she knew before he did that he was going to start kissing her neck and her chest and make his way slowly down to her nipples, her achingly hard nipples which so desperately wanted to feel his touch. She let his mouth trail over her skin, held his head lightly as he grazed his lips over her and sucked gently on one nipple. Pleasure spiked through her, flowing down to her clit and making her arch her back. He lifted his head and looked down at her. "Come on, what else you got?" he niggled gently. She felt almost dazed with desire, her groin almost throbbing now as she felt his long body press against hers, felt the hard length of him along her thigh. He was on top of her, his hips pinning her to the bed, his hands and mouth roaming over her, and those eyes, those bewitching, mischievous eyes, were gazing at her with such desire and, "I love you," she whispered. She held her breath. His brow pinched slightly, but to her amazement it wasn't out of pain or displeasure. It was like an arrow of sexual arousal had pierced him there, his face registering the pleasure before his cock surged against her thigh. That makes me even harder," he whispered, and took her mouth again. This kiss was more demanding, more sensuous. His tongue swept against hers as he tasted and devoured and consumed. Murmurs and little throaty male sounds of pleasure thrummed through his chest and spiked her own arousal. They were lost in the kiss, his hand moving to gently grip her head and hold her beneath him, the other hand positioning her hips so he could slide between her legs. She felt the first electric shock of his hard cock grazing against her slick folds, and she moaned into the kiss, which only made him tighten his grip on her and surge forward. They moved with each other, spurred on by the arousal of each other, spiraling upwards. He would be inside her in seconds, she knew, and she wanted him. She wanted to feel him take her, feel that first exquisite stretching of her body as his cock claimed her. She wanted to feel the power of his hips as he adjusted and flexed and began to thrust. She had never felt anything better in her life, and with his hard, urgent cock sliding gently against her clit, teasing her, tormenting her, it was all she could do to break the kiss. He didn't move far from her lips, didn't lift his head up to look down at her. His lips were so close to hers, his jagged breath fanning her face as he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes, waiting for whatever she had to say, making it more than clear that it didn't matter what she had to say. He was just urging her to say it so he could fall on her again and thrust into her. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked down at her. Irises so dark with lust, pupils large, lids heavy. "Say it," he whispered, his voice shaky. "Say it so I can fuck you, please, baby." Words that should have sounded harsh or crass, words that she'd never thought she'd want to hear while passionately making love. But on his lips they were sensual and aching, full of the longing she'd waited her whole life to hear from a man who truly wanted her. She didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to stop, didn't want to leave his arms or the luxurious pleasure of this moment. She wanted just to love him, to let him sink into her and make love over and over again. But she found herself looking up into his eyes and couldn't stop the quiet, shaky words that fell from her lips. "Will you marry me?" He thrust into her with one long, languid stroke and groaned as he took her mouth. She arched back again in pleasure and moaned into the kiss, suddenly surrounded by him, feeling his arm curved around her head and his hand in her hair gripping her as he kissed her with an almost savage need. She opened to him as his cock thrust deeper, pushing into her until their hips met and the force of his forward motion lifted her up onto his thighs. With the other hand he circled her waist and pulled her down towards him even more, lifting her slightly off the bed, letting the natural arch of her back make her head fall back. "Oh, yes," he groaned, gasping for air as he lifted from her lips, and then took them again. "Oh, God, baby, yes." His powerful muscles worked and his cock filled her, thrusting deep and withdrawing, tearing another groan from deep inside him. She barely heard him, registering only the intense sexual relief he was feeling, that glorious moment when he first thrust into her and began to satisfy his aching cock. His moans and soft sounds and soft yeses filled her ears and her senses, and pleasure rocketed through her, and she echoed them in her own mind. "Yes, baby, yes," she thought. "Oh, God, yes." They moved in a wave-like rhythm, his hips flexing and thrusting, her own hips rising to meet him, kissing and touching, holding, grasping, muscles straining and hearts pounding. He broke the kiss to catch his breath, to groan out his pleasure, lowering his head to the side of her face as he drove himself into her again and again. "Yes, baby, yes," he whispered raggedly against her ear. "Yes, yes, yes." And in that moment she understood, or thought she did. He wasn't just moaning out his pleasure. He was answering her question. Except he wasn't, her thundering heart told her. He wasn't saying yes, he wasn't. He was lost in sensation, breathing out the word over and over again to match the pleasure he was taking from her body. Feeling him move inside her with that exquisite pace that always sent her climbing up to a powerful orgasm, she gripped his back and held her to him, burying her face in his shoulder. It was too much for even a pretend game, a sexual tease, a meaningless fuck between friends. The emotion, when it finally crested, all but capsized her, and with a desperate cry she arched away from him, pushing against his strong chest. She squirmed away, trying to push him off her, moving up the bed to disengage from him. She was almost crying, her heart hurt so much. He lifted up from her, panting. "Baby, what is it? What's the matter?" He was still inside her, still holding her in place, but he had stopped moving and now looked down at her with wide, worried eyes. She squirmed again, and he got the message, withdrawing from her quickly and moving to the side so she could close her legs and roll away from him. "Katie, baby, what's the matter? Did I do something wrong?" He put his hand out to touch her, to reassure her, but she shimmied over to the other side of the bed and got up. "Did you mean that?" she asked, her voice shaking in spite of her best attempts at controlling it. "Did you mean what you said?" "Said what?" he asked, confusion furrowing his brow. "When you said yes," she said. "You kept saying yes. You just kept saying yes." He looked even more confused. I said marry me, and you kept saying yes," she said, feeling a reckless, stupid desperation well up in her. "Were you being serious?" He looked at her, ashen. "Were you?" he finally managed. She hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. She was trembling now, and was afraid if she spoke she'd start to cry. I thought we were just, I mean, it was just a game." "Of course," he said, sitting up and moving closer to the edge of the bed. "We're just goofing around, having some fun. Just being sexy, you know? At least I thought that's what we were doing. You know we'll always stop any time you want, right? There is no kill switch you have to say or anything." I know, she said, cutting him off, not wanting to hear what she knew was true. She folded her arms over her chest and shifted her weight awkwardly. "I'm sorry. It was just too much." "Katie," he said softly, reaching out for her again. His eyes had softened, and something tender shimmered in them. She couldn't name it because she'd never seen him look at her that way before. If she had to name it, she'd have to call it pity. Pity. Yeah, that's what she wanted to see in a lover's eyes. She moved away from the bed and back towards the open dresser drawer. "I have to get going," she said tightly. "Katie, wait, please," he pleaded, throwing his legs over the side of the bed and standing to block her way before she got to the dresser. "Just slow down a minute. Let's talk about this." "About what?" she asked, more harshly than she intended. "I got carried away. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. It was just a stupid game, and I'm sorry I said any of it." "I'm not," he said, grasping her shoulders gently and trying to find her eyes. "Katie, we can talk like that. It's okay. It doesn't spoil anything. We're lovers. We're going to say things sometimes." "We're not lovers, Noah," she said. "Remember our agreement?" His head went back a little and he blinked, and she could have sworn these words, more than any of the others, had taken him aback. He searched her face and seemed to struggle to find a reply, which never came. "Maybe that's why this has been so good," she went on, moving past him to fetch a sports bra and t-shirt from the drawer. Because it's not going anywhere. Because we're just fooling around for the summer and nothing more. Kate, I think it's just gone too far, she heard herself saying as she pulled on some panties and jeans. Her fingers fumbled as she tried to secure the top button, and she dedicated all her attention to the job, even as the words tumbled from her mouth. For me, anyway. You seem to have no trouble with it. Trouble with what? Being together? Of course I don't. Confusion colored his voice. He came to stand beside her at the dresser, trying to get her to look at him. I don't understand. I thought we were having fun. You were having fun, she retorted, looking at him through teary eyes. That's the problem. She thought better of her train of thought and closed her eyes briefly before continuing. And it's okay. It's fine. It's what we agreed. No, I mean just now, he said, gesturing back at the bed. I thought we were just being playful. It was sexy. It was romantic. And it was fake, she said, more loudly than she had intended. He looked genuinely stricken now, and she wished desperately that she had never done this, never let herself get lured into a no-strings-attached affair in the first place, let alone allow him to seduce her into such a gorgeous, sensual moment. She did not want to become the cliché, the girl who says she's cool with a friends-with-benefits relationship, and then, suddenly, unfairly, isn't. She wiped her eyes and drew in a deep breath, trying to center herself. She looked at him squarely, and even managed a wobbly smile. Look, when we started this, we both agreed that either one of us could end it at any time, right? No hard feelings, no emotional scenes. She took in a shaky breath. I think, all things considered, it's a good idea to call time on... Kate, wait, give me a chance to... She shook her head. You're leaving in a couple of days anyway. It's over, Noah. Let's just end it here, as friends, okay? He stared at her, his face now a mask of worry, and she knew that if she didn't leave this loft in the next few minutes, she might just break down and grab him, pull her to him, and hold him so tightly he'd struggle to breathe. She'd probably start babbling, too, saying over and over again how much she loved him and how desperately she wanted him to stay or go with him or something, anything, as long as she could call him hers. She might even beg him to stay and make a life with her, here in this little town, doing the same job that was destroying him, putting off forever the only thing he'd ever wanted to do. And he might even give in, which would be the worst part of all. It's been amazing, Noah, and a lot of fun, she went on, touching his arm briefly, in case she found herself unable to let go. You're just a bit too fun for me. I think you were right back when I first got here. I do need someone more serious, someone who wants to stay here and settle down. And you need to keep being yourself, in Panama or wherever, with whomever takes your fancy next. I wish you nothing but the best, I really do. Amazingly, it didn't come out bitter. She'd managed to make it sound like a genuine, good-natured wish for him. She'd managed not to make it sound like a dismissal. He didn't move as she ducked around him and went downstairs. The tears streamed down her face as she quickly made her through the cabin and out the door, hopping as she pulled on her sneakers. She even managed to hold her breath and stay quiet until she was in her car and backing out of the driveway. 1/2 mile down the gravel road, she pulled over to the side, yanked up the handbrake, and sobbed against the steering wheel until she thought she'd never be able to breathe again.